due next week.
Yes, they are, and this could not be more perfectly timed. My next guest has a book called, with a fitting title, Tax Me, I'm Canadian. Mark Milke is here to talk a little bit about it. Deadline is next week. Let's start with that. What should people know, just in broad strokes as to what they should know as we approach that deadline if they don't have the taxes already filed?
Don't cheat on your taxes, and don't believe the myth that they're illegal, which happens sometimes. As much as you want to believe, some people might want to believe your taxes don't have to be paid. They do. You get in trouble if you don't. So unfortunately, they're due and payable soon.
And if I owe money, what happens? And I missed that deadline.
You will end up paying interest to the government of Canada, and everyone pays enough taxes already, so you don't want to also pay interest on top of your tax burden.
And overall, if I can get something back, if I'm looking at a refund, I'm still in the clear, but they're going to hold off on that for a little while, right?
Well, maybe. They seem to be pretty quick. I actually got ahead this year and filed my taxes back in March. Got a refund in about 10 days. So actually, sometimes governments are very inefficient. Maybe the tax department is an exception, but that has its negative side too. They'll get to you quick.
Let's talk about the book itself, Tax Me, I'm Canadian. It seems like such a great title because we are sheep. I believe that we really are in this country. We don't put up enough of a fight. We don't get angry when we get overtaxed. Right. It seems fitting. Why'd you write it?
Well, people believe a lot of myths, right? They believe the myths that the Americans, are always lower tax than us. You go back to our history, we were the original low-tax state. I mean, you think of any modern tax, income tax, sales tax, other taxes, most of those started in the United States and only afterwards started up here. So, for example, the federal income tax, first one was in the United States and during the Civil War in the 1860s. We didn't get our federal income tax until 1917. Same thing with sales taxes. Plenty of American states had those before Alberta, ironically, had the first sales tax, had the first gasoline tax. But American states had those first. So I wanted to bust some myths and go back to our history, and that's where I start the book, right? The history of tax in Canada is that we were the country that said, let's keep our taxes low. Why? Because we want immigrants, we want them to come here, we want to beat the United States. That was part of our history. People forget that or don't know that.
How did the creep happen? Because it would seem that we've overtaken our American cousins down south and got to a point where in some provinces we're paying about 49-50% tax.
Right, and you're about to pay more here in Ontario,
right,
given the recent budget. Well, part of it is mission creep, right? I mean, the welfare state started in the late 1800s, for sensible things, maybe some pensions, some education, and it's kind of morphed into the entitlement state in the 20th century. I mean, think about it. Everybody almost is on the take these days. You have GM and Chrysler asking for money in a bailout. You've got government employees unions where they never get enough, right? And ironically, that takes away even from frontline services, because if you give it all to the existing, employees, and you don't hire new judges or something, to put, to give one example of a priority that's overlooked, you end up suffering on the front lines for stuff. So I think it's just that you have existing interests, whether it's on the business side, wanting corporate welfare, or whether on the government union side, wanting more money for their members, and taxpayers get squeezed in the middle, and it's been pretty much ever rising for most of the last 100 years.
How did we let them get away with it, though? I mean, all of those things you're talking about, the money being spent on X, Y, and Z, I mean, it makes sense when it's presented in those small fragments, but how did we let them get to the levels that we're at right now?
Well, I think at the back of it all, there is this belief that higher taxes lead to inevitably a better civilization, right? And look, at some basic level, of course that's true. You want the taxes to pay the cops, to pay the nurses, to doctors. Of course you want that. To the teachers, of course you want that. But over the last 50 years, this myth grew up that ever more taxes, and you see this in Ontario now, more taxes will save the province. Really? Actually, no, you're probably going to get less revenue because you're going to chase people out of the province. But it's a myth. Beyond some basic level, once you start overtaxing people, they flee to other jurisdictions, you depress business, you don't actually get the kind of revenues you want, and the existing interests just take up the extra tax room, right? You don't get extra services. So I think that's the myth that has to be broken. Taxes and civilization only at some basic level make sense. Once you get past 30-35% of the economy, you're pushing on a string. In Canada, we're at 38% of the economy.
And one of the things presented in yesterday's Ontario budget was this premise of taxing people who make $150,000 or more. Sounds great if you're on the scale that under $149,000. Sure, tax the rich guy. 150 grand is not rich, and I don't say that to be smug. I say that because I don't believe that number is what it used to be.
Well, not in a high-cost place like Toronto or Vancouver or Calgary, right? Many places across this country, it's expensive expensive to live. But here's the bigger picture, right? Do the rich pay a lot in taxes? Actually, they do already. The top 1% in the country pay 20% of all the income tax. The top 6% of income earners, so anyone over $100,000 in this country, top 6% of the population pay almost half the income tax. I mean, so when the left talks about needing to tax the rich more, I mean, listen, no one is overtaxed in this country. We're all taxed pretty heavily, and that's part of the problem. The problem is governments and politicians don't look at the spending side. They don't look at what the money is going to and try and economize there. The easiest thing for politicians is just to flip the switch, raise the taxes, and hope that saves their bacon.
Okay, there are people yelling at their television sets right now. What can I do? What can I do to put that genie back in the bottle?
Well, wow, that's a big question. I would say, listen, one of the things we ought to do in Canada, it's more of a medium to long-term thing. The public needs to be more involved. What I mean by that, the last chapter in Tax Mem Canadian looks at the Swiss. Nobody thinks the Swiss are uncivilized, but they pay less taxes than we do as a percentage of the economy. Why? Because the Swiss are involved through referendums in deciding things like taxes, debt, lots of other issues, right? They don't have a referendum every second day, but they have enough of them to kind of keep the politicians in check. I think actually, and we've used referendums in Canada's history to decide prohibition, voting rights for women in the 1910s. We've made the right decisions too. So I think Canadians need to be more involved in that level, and I think politicians, if they promise that and deliver on that, you'll see more of an interplay between politicians and the public, because the public is often way ahead of the politicians on these issues.
Don't government count on the fact that we are busy to do these things, to make sure that these taxes go through, that they're raised, and before you know it, they're already law, and I'm paying it at the gas pumps, I'm paying it at the convenience store, no matter where, I'm paying it off my paycheck. They just assume that we're asleep at the switch, and a lot of us are.
Well, and that's one of the reasons I wrote Tax Mem Canadian. It's one of the reasons I write a column every week. I think the public needs to be informed, right? And it needs to be, and I even put cartoons in the book to try to lighten up the tax subject, to try and give people a sense of, if you think you're overtaxed, you have a hunch that you're overtaxed, the book will prove that to you, and it'll give you some ideas, really, and kind of arm you with ammunition when you talk to your local politician or your member of parliament.
So good idea is to buy the book and keep it at your front door for when people go door knocking. Mark, we appreciate it.
I'm biased, but I agree. Thank you.
There you go.